Deputy Cairns, on behalf of everyone here, I want to congratulate you on your elevation. I don't know, is it in order to describe you this morning as the new leader of the Social Democrats? So your first leader's questions in that capacity. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Cian Corla. Taoiseach, I'm a member of the first ever generation who will be worse off than our parents. This didn't happen by accident. Political choices made by successive governments have resulted in the aspirations and dreams of an entire generation being either diminished or destroyed. Nowhere is the political betrayal of young people more evident than in the housing disaster. Skyrocketing rents and exorbitant house prices have resulted in the collapse of home ownership rates. We are now at the bottom third of EU countries when it comes to home ownership. You told a recent meeting of your parliamentary party you were alarmed to see that figure. But Taoiseach, were you surprised? Because all of this happened on Fine Gael's watch. The share of 25 to 34-year-olds who own their own home more than halved between 2004 and 2019, plummeting from 60% to just 27%. People can no longer afford to buy a home because they are spending all of their money on rent. Between 2012 and early last year, rents increased by a staggering 95%, while prices in the economy increased by just 11%. And rents are still increasing. There appears to be no upper limit. Taoiseach, the housing disaster isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's about young people whose adult lives are on hold because they can't afford to move out of their childhood bedrooms. It's about couples postponing having a family because they can't find affordable housing. It's about the stress and anxiety that causes once happy relationships to break down. It's about a lack of hope. It's about despair. It's about fear for the future. That your life will be permanently on hold. That you could be served an eviction notice at any moment. That you will never be able to afford to do what your own parents did on just one income, own a modest home. We know the housing disaster is a social catastrophe, and it is now threatening our economy too. Today, Chambers Ireland have warned the housing disaster is the biggest threat facing small and medium businesses. They say that multinationals are considering buying up entire housing estates. Taoiseach, an economy cannot function where workers cannot afford to buy or rent a home, and neither can a society. Fine Gael has been in government for almost my entire adult life. Your party first promised to address what was a housing crisis in 2014. 9 years later, it's an unprecedented housing disaster. Promises have been broken, targets have not been met, and lives are being ruined as a result. So Taoiseach, can you please tell me, when will people on average incomes be able to afford to buy or rent a home, and how much longer do we have to wait for the government's plan to work?
Thanks, Deputy. Just at the outset, I want to take this opportunity to congratulate you on your election as leader of the Social Democrats. As one leader to another, it is an enormous honour to be chosen by your party to lead them. It is a tough job, and much of the work goes unrecognised, whether it's fundraising, dealing with party accounts, disputes between public reps, internal rows, staff matters. It is all before you, and it is a very tough job, and a very big job. And I honestly do wish you a fair wind in that regard. I also want to take the opportunity to recognise the outgoing leaders, or the former leaders rather, Deputy Shortall and Deputies Murphy. We haven't always seen eye to eye, but I have seen many attempts to establish new parties in my time in politics, and very few survive 8 years, and very few have 6 TDs after 8 years, and it is a success that you've brought the party to this point. I don't think any party since the PDs has managed to reach that level of success. Of course, most new parties don't survive their second leader, but hopefully that won't be the case in the case of the Social Democrats. Just in relation to the question, Deputy, and thank you for raising it, because I'm deeply concerned about the fall in home ownership in Ireland. Ireland is a country in which 70%, well, nearly 70% of people own their own home. I want that to be the reality for people who are now in their 20s and 30s, and that's why I'm determined that this is the year in which we should turn the corner on the housing crisis. I heard you say that you believe that you will be the first generation of young people in a long time that are worse off than their parents. But I haven't thrown in the towel on that. That will only be the case if we don't turn the tide on the housing crisis and on home ownership, and I believe we will. When it comes to other things, other things that young people experience, we're doing much better. There are more employment opportunities than ever before for young people. Youth unemployment is at an all-time low. Incomes have never been higher. More young people experience further and higher education than ever was the case in the past. And of course, personal freedoms that young people have today, particularly people from LGBT backgrounds and women, are way beyond what would have been imaginable for previous generations. But the area where we are letting young people down is on housing. And I do acknowledge that. And that's why we're doing so much work to turn it around. And particularly when it comes to home ownership, I'm encouraged by the fact that last year, 16,000 young people, young couples bought their first home, the highest in 15 years. We need to build on that. We will build on that, mainly by driving increased supply of new housing, which is crucially important, by continuing to have in place the Help to Buy grant, or the Help to Buy scheme, which has already helped over 30,000 people, mostly young people, to buy their first home, and also now with the shared equity schemes like First Home, which I think are going to help a lot of people too.
Deputy Cairns.
First of all, just to thank you for your warm wishes. I appreciate that. You reeled off a number of statistics there and things in relation to employment and education, which are key. But without somewhere to live, it's difficult to get through any kind of employment or education. And the most important statistics to people out there are that rents have never been higher, house prices have never been higher, and homelessness has never been higher. And you say you're doing everything to try and turn that around. But Taoiseach, in a recent report, the Economic and Social Council said the fastest way to increase the supply of housing is bringing in a vacant and derelict properties tax. And the Social Democrats have suggested a punitive 10% tax on vacant homes. And inexplicably, the government has waited until this year to introduce a tax on vacant homes, and then it set it at a derisory 0.3% of the value of a home. So if you're doing everything to turn it around now, will you increase the rate so that it actually acts as a deterrent? Also in Denmark, if a property owner moves out of their home, they have to approach their local authority within 6 weeks, so it can be rented out, or else they have to try and sell it. That recommendation was made in 2020. Why haven't you acted on that either?
Thanks, Deputy. We do have a derelict sites levy, and that applies to derelict houses, and that's been in place for a very long time. No, this is a different one. It's been in place even when I was back on the County Council, so that's been around for 20 or 30 years, and that's a levy on derelict properties and derelict sites, and it increases every year. Councils are a bit slow putting properties on it, quite frankly, but it does exist, and we are bringing in a vacant property tax as well, initially at that rate, but I have an open mind on whether we increase that rate into the future as well. But as you know, and you'll know from the same report that you quoted earlier, that levels of dereliction in Ireland and vacancy are actually falling, and the levels of vacancy in areas where housing need is its greatest, like Dublin, Cork and so on, are actually quite low. And when you look at the exact same report, you'll see that when houses are vacant, they're often vacant for a reason, because they're for sale to let under renovation, or the person who lived there has just died. And that's all in the same report that you quote, and it's worth pointing that out. Another thing that we're doing, which is really important, is providing grants now to people, young people and older people, to do up old buildings and make them into homes, and that is going really well, and I'm really encouraged with what can be achieved around that.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
And as well as that, we're going to provide a fund to local authorities so that they can CPO vacant properties and derelict properties and bring them into use, and I think that can help too.